Alrighty, we are live. Welcome to it, everyone. Welcome to the very first episode of American and Paganism Witchcraft podcast. Our theme is Ancient Roots Seeking into the New World, and episode one is all about making the case for ourselves. Now, for the sake of organization, I have divided this up into three sections for our discussion. Section one is going to explore the justification for American paganism and witchcraft to exist as a recognized tradition in and of itself. Section two is the foundation of what American paganism and witchcraft means. And section three is the illumination of the path that lies ahead for us if we choose to accept it. And after the presentation of each section, there's going to be a pause for a question and answer, general discussion, opinions, reactions, all of that good stuff on the topic thus far. So I am going to go ahead and large size the screen on my side so I can more easily see my presentation slides. And at the end of section one, I will check in and to see what everyone has to say. So let's get straight into it. So our justification. We have to begin by acknowledging that ancient paganism was actually quite indistinguishable from the people's daily lives, their spiritual practices, customs, their culture, the way they conducted their affairs, as well as the land and environment in which they lived. It was all interwoven together. Now, modern paganism is much more likely to endure if it is similarly rooted into this ancient pattern. So the formation of American paganism and witchcraft is therefore not a break with established traditions, but rather is an attempt for us to follow the principles embodied by ancient pagans on this continent rather, in the context of the culture we're actually in. We are not seeking to reinvent the wheel, let alone break the wheel. The goal is rather to understand how that wheel manifests where we live and so that we can better operate within that flow. There are considerable synchronicities that exist within various pagan faiths that exist right alongside very regional specific ideas and traditions. That's why you will find very similar holidays, or at least holidays with quite similar themes, but different region specific things like a certain prominence of certain deities. The seafaring deities, of course, were not as prominent on the interior of the continent as people in the coastal areas, things like that. There's a lot of different reasons why, each region might have its own special things. Let's see, I lost my place in my notes. Anyways, but we are not denying the obvious synchronicities that already exist. The only thing we're really doing is asserting our right to establish our own regional specific ideas, practices, and traditions. And paganism, of course, has never been static. It's always evolved in a very natural, organic way, as have pagans also evolved in their understanding of spiritual matters. The two go right hand in hand. And American pagans are part in this natural evolution. This is really to be expected and accepted as just a natural, healthy development. We are not doing anything wrong by asserting ourselves as a pagan people and exploring the possibilities of what this means for us. We can proceed confidently and know we are doing something right, and I cannot stress this enough. Pardon me. And I want to stress this because I know a lot of people, they had a very difficult time transitioning from their prior religious experiences into a pagan path to begin with, and that they will encounter people who the very notion of American paganism would strike them as absurd. And so, well, you're still recovering from the bruises of one wounding. You're not exactly looking for another. So I want to assure people as much as I can that we aren't doing anything wrong. This is a necessary thing for us to do. And by going this route, we can leave a worthwhile legacy to future generations of American pagans and witches. So that does it for section one. Let me know in the comments right quick if you have anything to say, what you think of it so far. I'm going to take a sip of water and just give you a chance to say hello, even if you want to. But just one moment. This is actually the reason why I gave you guys that list of questions to reflect upon and consider 2 weeks ago. That way you'd have an opportunity to gather a few ideas of your own that way, because I know when you're receiving a presentation, you're just kind of taking in information, and it's a little hard to suddenly on the spot come up with, I have this question, or I thought about this, or something else. So I know that's definitely a tougher one. I want to give it just 1 minute more to make sure that I'm not cutting anyone off in case they have something they want to say or anything they want to ask. So, oh, I'm terribly sorry. Terribly sorry. Amanda King says, I'm a Christian pagan. I don't believe that I have to abandon my belief in God Almighty to become pagan. You and I aren't exactly on the same page about that one. It really depends upon what narrative you believe about the God of Abraham as to his identity, what you think. And I don't really think that particular issue is going to be where this discussion is going to be focused as far as American paganism begins. So we'll just kind of set that issue to one side for right now. And we will begin on section 2. And once we're done with section 2, I will come and see what the comments have been saying. So let's proceed. Section 2 is the foundation. Before we can address what constitutes American paganism and witchcraft, it really is necessary for us to define American paganism and witchcraft individually. So let's tackle the most difficult bit first and define what American is. And we will do as best as we can to not get into the political minefield that issue so often has. So we know that America is often called a nation of immigrants, and this description is really both true and false. Now, it is objectively factual that at some point everyone's ancestors traveled from somewhere else to ultimately settle onto this continent. That happened. This includes Native Americans, as there is increasing evidence to suggest that despite how long they and their ancestors have been on this soil, and it is a considerable amount of time, they were not the first inhabitants either. And the research of who the first inhabitants were, that's still very much in its infancy. I don't know how much progress we'll see on that in our lifetime. Archaeology is a painstaking, very slow process. But suffice it to say that all of us do indeed have immigrant ancestors somewhere down the line. However, is it fair, proper, or accurate to describe everyone as immigrants? The dictionary definition of immigrant is a person who comes to live permanently in a foreign country. They came from one place and then they came permanently to live somewhere else. So that status of being an immigrant, it is specific to the person or persons who traveled from that one place and settled down permanently into that new area. And that does not transfer to any of their descendants who remained in the area that was settled. So given this understanding, are the people whose families have lived, worked, and defended this land for decades, centuries, or even millennia immigrants? I would say no, of course not. Now, it is very fair to declare that we are a nation of people who immigrated, but we are not a nation of immigrants because some of us have been here for quite a while. And to persist in calling people whose families have been here for generations immigrants, that really is the same as psychologically undermining them, instilling a sense of not belonging, and creates a sense of separation between themselves, the land, and honestly, each other. So let's go back to the beginning of American history a little bit. Before the Revolutionary War, the sentiment of desiring greater autonomy from the crown had been gaining strength for decades, and there had been some sporadic kinetic conflict of varying degrees of severity. But 1775 proved to be the year that was a clear demarcation point in history. Prior to 1775, we were colonials, subjects of the British Crown, and by and large, ethnically transplanted Englishmen. But 1775 and onward, we became, and we have remained ever since, Americans. In 1781, the Articles of Confederation were ratified. That was our first system of governance on this continent, and that was ultimately replaced by the Constitution we now know today in 1788. The families who were living in America during these formative years and who were participants in these massive events, they are the foundation generation of the American family. Every nation that exists is essentially a large extended family group. In America, we have a somewhat more complicated family structure because it isn't just one people group that came here. Ultimately, it was a large section of the transplanted Englishmen. It was joined up by other Europeans, by people who were brought over here by Africa, largely against their will, and many other places of the world. So we are a complicated blended family, but nevertheless, we are still a series of extended family groups. So this raises the question, how does one join a nation's family? Firstly and primarily, one is born into it by virtue of having parents who are already part of the existing family nation. That's very much how descent works. Secondly, one can be adopted via undergoing the legal process of immigration, and then they're gradually naturalized, rather like a step family, learning how to blend into a single family. And then finally, one is granted citizenship, and that's essentially the equivalent of being in-lawed into the existing American family. So, there you have it. Despite all the minefields we're all aware of, that wasn't too bad. So everything else from here on out should be fairly downward slope. So the next part is to define paganism. Pagan spirituality has several identifying hallmarks that distinguish it from non-pagan faiths. The first lies in the differences between natural and revealed religion. Natural religion is a form of spirituality born of the natural world. Divinity, spirits, the human soul, and anything broadly characterized as supernatural, they are all deemed as part of nature and not separate from nature. It also encompasses the idea that the use of one's intellect is an effective tool for discerning spiritual matters, even absent of direct divine contact or intervention. By contrast, revealed religion is based upon divine revelation directly bestowed upon humans. Most usually, this is achieved through the scriptures of a religion's authorized holy book, but there are also recognized prophets within such faith. Divinity is viewed as wholly separate from nature and above it. So it's clear to see that paganism of any form is a natural religion, not a revealed religion. And this brings us into a world accepting versus a world rejecting view. A world accepting view is one that sees the spiritual and material as an interwoven whole and indivisible from each other. The purpose of life is to live it, that we are intended to enjoy all blessings. We should find meaning in accomplishment and in overcoming obstacles. And the journey of corporeal life is its own reward. Death is not the end of everything, and nor is the life, death, rebirth cycle something to fear. World rejecting view is one in which the spiritual and material are entirely separate and even incompatible. There's a focus upon a supreme deity and one's circumstances in the coming afterlife. Corporeal life in this world is considered to be fleeting and filled with temptation and vice. Virtue is founded upon the idea of not belonging to this world and not seeking to in hopes of belonging to the world to come. So quite obviously, we can see paganism has a world accepting view. Other characteristics of pagan spirituality include polytheistic belief or pantheistic belief, various forms and interpretations of animism, masculine and feminine divinity, reverence for ancestors, it's earth-centric. The pursuit of excellence is the foundation of many virtues. It is non-proselytizing, and its inspiration is taken from pre-Abrahamic sources, folklore, and mythology. Now this brings us to witchcraft. Witchcraft is a pagan spiritual practice that involves attuning oneself to magical energies, seeking to understand the mysteries, learning a variety of spiritual disciplines, including but not limited to astrology, divination, natural philosophy, healing, meditation, dream interpretation, herbalism, study of crystals, animal totems, spell work, teaching, and officiating at pagan rituals, celebrations, and rites of passage. Witchcraft is equal measures magic and priesthood, or at the very least, the craft is the center of someone's spiritual path. The practice of magic outside of a spiritual context, that is the realm of practical magic, and those who go that route are properly referred to as practical magicians, not witches or wizards. Practical magicians are not, and I stress not, less knowledgeable, skillful, or powerful. The difference between witchcraft and wizardry and practical magic lies in whether there's a spiritual focus to what someone is doing or the absence of one. Practical magicians are more than entitled to respect for their choice of practice and their competency in it, but they are not entitled to describe themselves as witches or wizards. So now that we have all of these definitions laid out for us, let's put it all together. From this, we can glean that American paganism is the nature-based religious philosophy and practices as inherited by Americans from their pre-American, pre-Abrahamic ancestors as practiced on the North American continent in the context of American culture. American witchcraft is the spiritual and magical disciplines that explore the mysteries, seek divinity, create a bond between the person and the land, and provide spiritual services for the American pagan community. So that does it for section 2 and the foundation. And so Let us see. Does anyone have questions, comments, opinions, anything at all? I see Amanda King that she's reiterating her previously expressed belief. I understand you're entitled to think whatever you wish. It's I think the exploration of between world accepting and world rejecting worldviews, as opposed to, and also a natural and revealed religion, I think that lays out the foundation for my opinion and why I don't conform to yours. So, does anyone else have any thoughts about this? Does this so far seem like a fairly reasonable, solid ground for us to be standing upon, or just what do you think? I want to give everyone a few minutes to type something out. Because this is your guys' time. I mean, this could be super short podcast or it can be super long. I have my entire afternoon cleared if that's what if people are feeling chatty. Of course, I know it's Friday. A lot of people are at work. I'm going to have to experiment a little bit about times to see which is going to be the best moments for people to actually tune into these podcasts. We'll just have to see. We'll have to do a little bit of trial and error here and there. And of course, it's also a really nice day in a lot of places. And I imagine most people are taking the opportunity with the good weather to get outside. Well, thank you, Amanda. I'm scratching my head as to how you could agree with everything I've said, considering what I've said has really contradicted your own premises. But thank you for the support, I suppose. Um, so I guess on that note, we shall move on to section 3, and this is illumination, where we're going to be talking about essentially 3 different ways that are going to help guide our pathway forward if we use it as light lampposts, essentially. So, section 3, illumination. We'll begin with being able to hear the song of the land. Now, I put it this way because pagan spirituality really begins with people noticing and recognizing the significance of the spiritual within the material, in other words, the spirit of their environment. One of the great errors of the colonial period was the failure of colonists to begin a relationship with the land itself. Well, and we understand why they didn't do that because that's not customary in Christian religions to do so. I mean, they might have a, ask for their God's blessing over their community or something else, but it is not any kind of ceremony that is actually bonding people to the land itself or recognizing the life forces that are present on the spiritual realm as expressed through the land. Now, North pagans, by contrast, they're known for prioritizing the giving of offerings to land spirits and beginning a relationship with them whenever they settled into a place that was new to them. We have very good records of this in Iceland specifically, where we don't have our ancestors buried here, we don't have that tie, so we are going to introduce ourselves to the land spirits, and we're going to try to form a good rapport with them before we can do anything else. And I think that's a really good example that we can follow today. And we have a tremendous opportunity to correct the initial discourtesy that was done to the land spirits. And we can begin that process wherever we happen to be living. And this includes even if someone is living in a very urban area. You might have a little bit of difficulty finding a good spot to do this, but still, no matter where you are, you can still reach out to those spiritual energies. Offerings of bread and water are sufficient to acknowledge the spirits that reside where we live and to declare our own friendly and respectful intent. And also, we could acknowledge that, say, I know when my people first came here, this did not take place. They did not know any better because it was not their custom, but I do know better now. And so I want to start on a better footing. And I think that could go a long way towards repairing the relationship, and that can really transform the game for us between merely being people who happen to be occupying a area or space, and to people who are actually belonging to the land itself and the land belonging back to them in a healthy relationship. Also, anytime we perform outdoor ritual, we can create or visit an outdoor shrine, or even if we're just meditating outside, we can use those occasions to pay our respects to the land spirits. And like I was saying a few moments ago, it is a gorgeously beautiful day today. If you are able to get outside, I mean, I definitely recommend you do so. I know I'm planning to get outside later today. And when we do that, I mean, we can take a little something, even if it's just pouring out some water in a specific place, saying, I am giving this to you. Whatever it is, we can still pay our respects to those land spirits. We also benefit from observation and by being active listeners. We can study the geological history and the composition of the land. We can look into the folklore of the area, including pre American folklore. We can track weather patterns to better understand the ebb and flow of energies, what's normal and what's exceptional, and to get a little bit more into that groove. We can study successful plant and animal species as regarding their physical and spiritual properties. We can go exploring and make note of any place that just, feels a bit more potent with spiritual energies. Another thing we can do is to actively study our family roots and grow into them. Just beginning with how long has your family been here on this continent? What areas have your family lived? Where have you lived for that matter? A lot of people move around, so you have a lot of different areas to explore and take into account. What major events of history has your family been present for? Did they play a part in any of those events? Where do you feel most at home? And what is it that actually gives you that feeling? And what do you want to pass on to the next generation of your family? And this is a phrase that has been going in my mind for months, that we are rooted in the past, we're living in the present, and we are cultivating the future. That has just been going through my brain over and over again. And so let's think about a little bit about our past roots. America, in its founding principles, was the fulfillment of 18th century English liberalism. The transplanted Englishmen who comprised most of the founding generation of Americans were themselves the consequence of a prior ethnogenesis. Now, in case that's a word that's unfamiliar to you, the definition of it is the formation and development of an ethnic group through a process of migration, intermarriage, cultural exchange, and language use. And so we know that the Celts and the Norse and the Germanics, they all came together in Britain and they baked a cake, and that cake became the English. And it was that process that connects the English through direct bloodline to all Northern European peoples. Culturally and philosophically, the British have roots in the peoples and traditions of the Celtic speaking peoples, of the Norse Germanics, Greco Romans, and there was some influence from ancient Egypt. And as Americans, because of who our forebears were in the founding generation of this country, we are the inheritors of that fusion of genetics, culture, and philosophy, tradition, and even religion. Now, non-pagan Americans, they do have a tendency to look at the influence of, the Christian veneer of Western civilization, and they pretend that it's not just merely a chapter of the history of the Western world, but the source of all things virtuous. American pagans, however, take a deeper look at the matter and clearly see the more ancient ideas that ultimately gave birth to our society. We are putting the veneer of the Abrahamic narrative aside, and we are taking inspiration from the ancient sources and knowledge, the pan European and Egyptian influences, and the makeup of our society's culture, our system of governments, and indeed even our common genetics. This is the foundation upon which we live, as well as the seeds we sow, so that future generations of American pagans and witches have something to inherit. So the next thing is our sense of morality, ethics, and etiquette. Now, we are not bereft of guidance on such matters, and we can easily look to the Havamal, which is the Norse Germanic um, extraction. Right now, in the daily forecast, I'm sharing verses from the Cowboy Havamal, which is a translation by Dr. Jackson Crawford that essentially put it into the spoken accent of Western American speech. It makes it a little bit more accessible for people. We can look at the Celtic triads, which we wrapped up a whole collection on that just in January. We can look at Greek and Roman philosophers. We can look at the negative confession of Ma'at, which is of Egyptian extraction. By studying these materials, it helps us arrive at a common sense of values and also to identify ideas that have endured from the time of ancient pagans straight through the conversion and down to this day. This enables us to have more confidence in ourselves and what we're doing and whether or not it's fitting, proper, and moral. Now, the last thing I want to leave us with as far as the illumination of what can guide us forward, we have our cultural heart, we have our sense of morality and ethos, our sense of life, and now it's our celebrations. You can tell a lot about people by what they celebrate. And pagan holy days have always been centered around the agricultural cycles, feast days for specific deities, notable events, and cultural and civic occasions. America has a variety of civic holidays, which we can celebrate in a pagan fashion. Our major cultural holiday is Thanksgiving, and I think that has potential to be quite unifying for Americans of every faith, as well as those of no faith. I mean, think about it. I mean, the tribe who was concluding the peace treaty with the Puritans. They weren't Christian by any stretch of the imagination. It's one of those rare things where there's just no doubt that it was the product of two very different peoples. And the idea of very different peoples being able to unify for common purpose, I think that is a message our society is in dire need of, both inside and outside of the pagan world. And for our American pagan holidays, I do have a proposition that I want to put for everyone's consideration. I've based the cycle upon the familiar Wheel of the Year, which already takes influence from several traditions of European paganism and provides a steady rhythm for the flow of the year. It makes a lot of sense to me. And what I've come up with is the Feast of Winter, for Yule and the winter solstice. Feast of the Quickening for Imbolc and Charming of the Plough. Feast of Planting for Astara, the spring and vernal equinox. Feast of Life for Beltane. Feast of Summer, which is Letha, the summer solstice, midsummer, choose your term. Feast of Ripening in place of Lunasa and Freyfaxi. Feast of Harvesting, Mabon and the autumn equinox. And Feast of Death for Samhain and Winter Night. Now, this cycle, as it always has, acknowledges the agricultural cycle. It's an allegory for the human life cycle, and it's easy to see what deities to involve in particular celebrations. And the reason why I am presenting these altered names is because these names are in our common language, and it has a shared meaning for us all. We know what winter means. We know what the quickening of life means. We know when it's planting time. We know that when life is blooming. We know when it's time for the summer. We see when it's the ripening and the harvest season. We see when the harvest is coming. We know when things are dying down. It has relevance to all of us. And I think that's important. And by this means, if it was to ever become embraced, either in this form or in something similar, it means that American pagans and witches could have something in common to celebrate together, and that could create a sense of cohesion within our community while still making room for very region specific variations because there's a lot of different regions in the United States and that will need to be grappled with. And this also allows us to maintain our freedom to have our own personal practice. We have our core community and we have what we do as individuals, and it can all work very nicely together. So, what do you think of all of this as a means to light our way forward? I'm turning it over to you with questions, comments, or opinions. I'll give everyone a moment, see what you guys have to say, because I know I'm throwing a lot of things at you right now, and it can take a little bit of time for a person to just kind of decide what they think about it all. So I want to make sure everyone has a moment. I definitely don't want to cut off anyone too short. Hmm. And for anyone who's actually finding the time to join me in the middle of the day on a Friday, I do thank you very, very much because I'm sure a lot of people are at work. A lot of people who may not be at work are outside enjoying the good weather. So I do appreciate you making time for little old me and the thoughts I happen to have. And also, if you are watching this after the fact, please don't be bashful. Any kind of reactions or feedback or questions or ideas of your own that you have, make sure to mention those fully in the comment section under this video. This, because like with any other formation of cultural paganism of any kind, it's never the product of any one individual. So make sure that you are putting your 2 cents in. We're all adding our own ingredients to the soup. Alrighty, looks like we are safe to proceed. And now I want to take you to topics I will be getting into next month, March 2025. The next episode, we're going to be discussing the Earth's root chakra because, like ourselves, the planet itself does have its chakras. And the Earth's root chakra just happens to be in California. It's located on Mount Shasta. And people who have been there, they have even reported this sense of being pulled down into the earth. The energy there can be extremely strong. So I want to discuss that. I also want to discuss about what things look like when there's a disruption of the root chakra. And also, just as a reminder, when the root chakra is out of order, that has a detrimental effect of all the other chakras that proceed from it. We know that's true for ourselves. And when we apply the principle as above, so below, as within, so without, as the universe, so the soul, we know that if the earth's root chakra is out of order in any way, that's going to have a detrimental effect upon everything else. So I think we have a lot to talk about there. Then, because we'll be having Ostara, the spring equinox. We're going back into the sign of Aries. Aries is the first sign of the zodiac cycle. That's essentially more or less the astrological new year. And so we'll talk about that, pagan calendars. Honestly, I think if ever there was to be a switch up of the calendar again, which, there always seems to be one every few centuries, I'm in the camps of saying, let's just adopt the months as the zodiac signs. I think that would just be simpler. I think would be a lot easier for all of us. But that's me, and we'll talk about that a lot next month. And then the third topic we'll tackle for next month's fully scheduled episode is infusing the American spirit into our practices. That's when we're going to discuss a little bit more about our own cultural peculiarities that I think could have a big impact on how we practice and just the mindset with which we approach our practice, the mindset by which we analyze information even. I think there's a lot to get into there. As we get a bit closer to the day, I will, of course, send out a little, sneak peek video. I'll have probably another set of questions that people are very welcome to consider so that if they're able to tune into the live stream, they might already have their thoughts in order about these topics and have contributions to make because, again, this is all about the back and the forth. And then, then we'll know when it's scheduled and we'll get into it. So that's pretty much what I have to say to you guys. If you want to contact me about anything regarding American Paganism and Witchcraft podcast, if you would possibly care to be interviewed at some point about your own journey, anything of that sort, you can email me at American Paganism and Witchcraft at proton.me or at Brigantia Blackbird at protonmail.com. Thank you for being with me. Those of you who are here, thank you to Amanda who popped in. Even though you and I obviously disagree about some things, I appreciate you coming in and saying what you have to say. And of course, everyone watching later, let me know what you think. I'll see you guys. Bye for now.